Welcome back. The Syrian army has advanced against Islamic State towards the Iraqi border as the military pushes out remaining terrorists in the country. These are the latest pictures from the ground. The Syrian army previously took control of the last ISIL stronghold in the country, the town of Abu Kamal. They're now pushing the extremists out of surrounding villages. The latest advances now allow the army to provide better logistics between the newest gains and already established positions. But despite the fact that ISIL is almost eliminated in Syria, American forces don't seem to be planning to withdraw from the country, which they invaded on the grounds of fighting terror. RT's Jacqueline Vuga explains.
ISIL has been losing territory in Syria at breakneck speed, and its all-out defeat looks to be on the horizon. Even the U.S. seems to agree on that front.
Secretary Tillerson has engaged a great deal of sort of personal diplomacy on Syria, the defeat of ISIS, and now that ISIS, in terms of as a physical caliphate, will be gone by the end of the year.
Syria has in fact already declared victory over ISIL and issued a warning to the U.S. that it's high time they left as well.
The Syrian Arab Republic again calls for the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of U.S. forces from the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic. This presence is an aggression against Syria's sovereignty and independence and will be dealt with on this basis.
And that shouldn't be a problem given that Trump himself has said that America's interest in Syria is reserved to fighting Islamic State.
We have very little to do with Syria other than killing ISIS.
So theoretically, if ISIL only has a couple of months left, then so does the U.S. presence in Syria, right? Don't hold your breath. The U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis recently hinted at what the U.S. will need to see before they leave.
We're going to make sure we set the conditions for a diplomatic solution. Not just, fight the military part of it and then say good luck on the rest of it. We did it for that, to support the diplomatic solution.
But that's a tune we've heard before, which would mean waiting around for the opposition groups, some of whom the U.S. supports, and the legitimate government, who never invited the U.S. into the country in the first place, to come to the table and figure out who stays and who goes. Mattis says U.S. soldiers have a right to be in Syria despite Damascus's objections.
The UN said that ISIS, basically we can go after ISIS, and we're there to take them out. But that doesn't mean we just walk away and let ISIS 2.0 pop back around.
But that remark about the UN isn't 100% true. The U.S. does not have a UN mandate to deploy, let alone station troops in Syria. A UN Security Council resolution only authorized sanctions to be used against ISIL, such as freezing assets or an arms embargo. But nowhere is troop deployment to a sovereign country mentioned. And the Syrian Democratic Forces, one of the groups who the U.S. backs and who happens to be at odds with Damascus, have welcomed America's long-term plan for Syria.
They have a strategy for decades to come. There will be military, economic and political agreements in the long term between the leadership of the northern areas and the U.S. administration.
So while ISIL is on its way out, all signs point to the Pentagon digging in.
Former U.S. diplomat Jim Jatras questions the reasons behind Washington not wanting to withdraw from Syria, even after the elimination of ISIL.
Any attempt to stay in Syria has nothing to do with ISIS or ISIS-2 or anything of this sort. U.S. troops are not there legally in the first place, unlike Iraq, where they have been invited in by the government of that country. The only resolution that comes even close to suggesting some kind of authority to go fight against ISIS made it very clear that that could only be done in compliance with international law and with national sovereignty. And that means with the authorization and invitation of the Syrian government, which the U.S. forces do not have. So there's simply no way you can stretch the language of any of the relevant UN Security Council resolutions to say that it gives legal authority to the American military presence in Syria.
The continued Saudi-led blockade of the Yemeni town of Hodeidah has provoked a mass protest from locals. Demonstrators marched through the town carrying banners accusing Riyadh and its allies of genocide against the Yemeni people. It's now more than 2 years since the Saudi-led incursion in the country, supporting the ousted president against Houthi opposition fighters. But events have taken a turn recently when Houthi militias fired a missile towards the Saudi capital. Here's a reminder of what happened afterwards. The day after the missile launch, the coalition closed all missiles, air, sea and land routes, tightening an already existing blockade. But under pressure from humanitarian organisations, it was partially lifted a week later. However, the UN and aid groups still say that's not enough to improve the dire situation in the country. We spoke to the communications coordinator of the Red Cross in Yemen, who says time is running out.
Unfortunately, it's far from being enough. I think it's a common knowledge when people look at Yemen. We know that 2/3 of the population, they are in the north. And the lifted blockade, even if we see it as a good gesture, at the end of the day, it's just lifting from one side of the country and not taking into consideration the other side. We believe that this is not enough, and we need to have full access to the country.
The Red Cross is now warning 1 million people are at risk of a renewed cholera outbreak in 3 Yemeni cities due to Saudi Arabia's blockade. That's all. Welcome back. The Syrian army has advanced against Islamic State towards the Iraqi border as the military pushes out remaining terrorists in the country. These are the latest pictures from the ground. The Syrian army previously took control of the last ISIL stronghold in the country, the town of Abu Kamal. They're now pushing the extremists out of surrounding villages. The latest advances now allow the army to provide better logistics between the newest gains and already established positions. But despite the fact that ISIL is almost eliminated in Syria, American forces don't seem to be planning to withdraw from the country, which they invaded on the grounds of fighting terror. RT's Jacqueline Vuga explains.
ISIL has been losing territory in Syria at breakneck speed, and its all-out defeat looks to be on the horizon. Even the U.S. seems to agree on that front.
Secretary Tillerson has engaged a great deal of sort of personal diplomacy on Syria, the defeat of ISIS, and now that ISIS, in terms of as a physical caliphate, will be gone by the end of the year.